The oyster industry on the Clyde River in New South Wales is dominated by farmers with generations of family history. But Steve Folletti knew practically nothing about the business when he bought a rundown lease while working overseas about 20 years ago.
Dreaming about coming back home to the beach and the river and everything, I thought, an oyster lease might be a good thing to buy just for a place to go fishing. And you know, I must remember to go fishing one day.
What he lacked in experience as a farmer, he more than made up for in his understanding of how to market fine food. He'd been managing the Australian Wheat Board's Asian office in Japan.
I was exposed to the Japanese food industry, which is just the most sophisticated and challenging place on earth. And I thought, well, what we'll do is just bring all those lessons from the Japanese food market and the Chinese and the Korean and the Taiwanese market and translate them into what is a commodity, a bulk commodity industry. We will de-commoditise it. We will differentiate it. We will articulate it. And most importantly, we'll enhance, we'll improve the endpoint execution. That is the experience at the table.
Steve Folletti calls himself an affineur. It's a French term for an oyster grower who buys young oysters and finishes them for the market. He leaves the breeding to others.
We find farmers who are absolutely brilliant at what they do. And we're very happy to pay them a huge premium to do it for us and deliver us something to a spec. And what's finishing? Well, you know, it's a deluxe motor vehicle, it's oak Chardonnay, it's smoked cheese, it's adding that extra layer of finish to a product. And so instead of trying to do A to Z badly, we do F to K extremely well. That's our forte.
At the peak of the season, Steve Folletti's company Moonlight Flat sells about 600 dozen oysters a week to 40 restaurants around Australia.
For the boathouse today, we want 5 clear loons, 5 dozen clear loons and 5 dozen kisses, please. And dill, we need 5 rusties and 5 label rouge.
Every oyster is graded by hand at their Bateman's Bay shed to ensure premium quality. And they're all sold live.
It's a tremendous pleasure to be here in Sydney because Sydney is one of the last great oyster cities on the planet because there's nowhere else that has 3 species of oysters within a 3-hour courier radius within beautiful waterways and served at a fine dining restaurant.
Steve Folletti runs master classes in oyster appreciation at the Boathouse on Sydney Harbour. It's a restaurant that's built its reputation on fresh oysters, and head chef Colin Barker is also a keen advocate of shuck to order.
And it's just a simple wiggle to get into that hinge. When you get there, the shuck should hold itself in. So we haven't had to force it. After that, it's just a simple click of the wrist.
Ooh. Nice pop.
And then what we want is just to, we don't want to tip that oyster on its side too far. We don't want to lose that beautiful liquor that's made its way all the way up from Bateman's Bay for us. So we've got a beautiful oyster there. There's no stab in the abdomen. Then just to sever the oyster from the shell, just release the other side of that adductor. We don't flip the oysters. Commercially, a lot of guys flip them. They're a bit plumper and tends to hide a few sins if you do it that way around, but we serve them just the way that nature intended.
Colin Barker says restaurant customers no longer want their oysters pre-shucked and rinsed.
Once upon a time it was the done thing because it was a really unknown sort of entity. Shucking your own oysters was time consuming, fiddly, no one knew how to do it. But more and more nowadays people are starting to do it and it's more the norm.
And what's the advantage in terms of the flavour?
It's the flavour of a freshly shucked oyster is really unique. You've got to think that, you know, each of those regions have got their own, you know, environmental factors that are going to, you know, come through in that oyster liquor.
Now Steve Folletti has a new mission. It's to introduce Piquepoul to Australia's oyster culture. It's a French wine variety grown specifically as a match with oysters. Colin Barker says it won't be a hard sell.
Pigpoul for eons has been the oyster wine of France, and over here until recent times it was an unheard of entity.
Can't get any better than this, can it?
Works well, doesn't it?
Steve Folletti says he discovered Piquepoul while on a study tour of the French oyster industry. He describes his first encounter as a sensory thunderbolt.
The waiter came up and just said, "Wine, sir." And I said, "Yeah," thinking, where's the wine list? There wasn't any. There wasn't a choice. It was just Piquepoul or nothing. So I thought, oh, never heard of this. Give it a go. Bang! Just flew off the ground. Wow, this is such a match with oysters.
Now, 8 years later, he's growing Pigpool near Cowra in the central west of New South Wales. The road to harvest was long and complicated. Steve Folletti imported cuttings from France, which spent 3 years in quarantine and another 2 years in a cloning laboratory.
So exciting to see what this obscure grape in the south of France is doing out in the hot summer of the central west in New South Wales.
Winemaker Anthony Denisi says the high-yielding French variety is thriving in the Central Ranges region.
Theoretically, it should work, and the proof's in the pudding. What I've tasted so far is very exciting. It is a white variety which does ripen later in the season, so it ripens outside of the heat wave window. So it's quite an interesting variety. It could turn out to be a very good match for this region.
And just as he's done with oysters, Steve Folletti says education will be the key to ensuring Australians embrace Pigpool and enjoy what he believes is one of the world's great food and wine combinations.
Totally recommend oyster first, little chew, little maceration, get it going, and then little sips of the Pigpool, and it will linger and it will repeat and come back in your mouth. You get your value out of this. It continues on for 10 or 15 minutes. Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah. I never dreamed that I'd have our own wine, and what a match. It's been one hell of a ride, I'll tell you.